Good morning and welcome to the Tony Grampsas Youth Services. I guess it could be good afternoon or good evening for some of you. This will be the beginning of your individual reviewer training webinar. We are recording it here at CDHS, and this is Christy Griffith-Jones. I'm the TGYS Program Administrator. Also here are Rochelle Viertaler and Nancy Cruz. They are Program Specialists for TGYS. They may be jumping in at different times to provide additional information throughout this webinar. All right, so the agenda for the webinar is first, thank you for taking time out of your day to help us with this request for application review. We appreciate your time and effort to provide feedback and scores for all of our grant applications. We'll quickly go through the purpose and background and talk about the available funds for TGYS, as well as who eligible applicants are and what the funds can be used for. Once we get to the review process, that's where we'll be spending a lot more time to make sure that it's as clear as possible when you start this review. So I'd encourage you to have a copy of each of the documents or have them open and available to you. Each of the documents that are in your reviewer packet that you received through Dropbox, because we will refer to those and it will make it easier for you if you can see those firsthand. So the purpose of TGYS really is to provide funding for local organizations for prevention, intervention, and education programs for children, youth, and their families. And the idea is to support programs that prevent youth crime and violence, youth marijuana use, and child abuse and neglect. We are guided by Colorado Revised Statutes 266.8-101 through 106. You can Google that and find those statutes online if you'd like to learn more about TGYS. It has changed over the years. As far as background goes, it originally came about in 1994 through legislation after the Summer of Violence. And Senator Tony Grampsas was instrumental in securing the funding for this program. At that time, it was known as the Youth Crime and Prevention and Intervention Program. And the name was changed to Tony Grampsas Youth Services Program in 2000. We are funded through various tax funds, and the Joint Budget Committee determines the exact appropriation each spring during their meetings. So we don't know the funding availability until about March or April of each year. Once the JBC has made a determination, then the governor it gives final approval on the budget. For this year, state fiscal year 2016, our total funding was approximately $8.9 million. And of that 8.9, as you can see, the majority of our funding came from tobacco funds, and that was through an increase this last year. We originally were receiving about 3% of all tobacco revenue, and we now receive 7.5%, and this was through House Bill 16-1408, which is now in our legislation. We anticipate for the upcoming year that we'll receive a similar appropriation, but we, again, we are not sure and won't really know until March or April. So we hope to have about $8.99 million in funding for this current grant cycle, which you are going to be reviewing. Eligible applicants. This is defined in our statute, but essentially it's any local government, any public or non-sectarian secondary school, and that can include charter schools, a group of schools, school districts, groups of school districts, boards of cooperative services, and institutions of higher education. Colorado National Guard can also apply, as well as state agency or state-operated programs, and any private, nonprofit, or not-for-profit community-based organizations may apply. With regards to the use of funds, we have two slides here. We have one, the first one here, as you can see, is the what the funds can be used for, and we list out all the possibilities. It's really pretty broad. We serve children and youth ages 0 up to 25 and their families, and it can be for pretty much any type of prevention, intervention, or education program for reducing youth crime and violence, child abuse and neglect, and adolescent or youth marijuana use. The key thing to note, so I'll let you go ahead and read through those slides on your own if you have questions. We have reviewed most of the applications to make sure that the programs would be eligible, but if you have any questions about whether a program is eligible or you have any concerns, please be sure to note that in your comment section or send us an email or give us a phone call to ask questions about that. The key thing to note, though, here is what the funds cannot be used for. So residential treatment programs or mental health treatment is not a possibility. Child care slots or student scholarships. So we do provide some child care when it is in conjunction with a program, but we do not have like drop-in, we do not provide funding for drop-in child care slots. Another thing to note in this section, if you look at bullet point 5, states engage in inherently religious activities, including but not limited to worship, religious instruction, or proselytization as a part of the programs or services provided pursuant to this application. So we do have organizations like Catholic Charities, Lutheran Family Services, those organizations that may be faith-based may apply for the funding, but their programming cannot be inherently religious. So please be sure to note that when you're reviewing the statement of work. If you have questions or concerns, you can make a note in the comments, or you can contact one of us with your questions. The duration of the grant. Currently, we have 3-year grant cycles. So as I mentioned, we're in the last year of a 3-year grant cycle, and you are reviewing applications for the next grant cycle, which is state fiscal year 18 through 20, and it will begin on July 1st of this year and continue through June 30th of 2020. This is just a quick overview of the review process, the big picture of what we do to review applications for TGYS. Parts are provided to ensure consistency and review of each program for which funds are being requested. So part 1, as I mentioned, is the agency cover sheet that provides the agency name, type, program name, and budget. And again, you will have one for each program. Second part will be the narrative, and within that there are 5 sections that you'll be scoring. Part 3 is a statement of work, 1 for each program, and the logic model, 1 for each program. So for the agency cover sheet, this is an example that we wanted to provide to you. So in this example, we have, if you'll notice, it lists the number of your team. So this is team 1, and we've blocked out the name of the agency and the program name just to provide a little bit of confidentiality, although team 1, you'll recognize this when you look at your documents. So in this example, you'll see the agency name, XYZ agency, or let's say it's Catholic Charities or Big Brothers, Big Sisters, or one of 180 applicants that applied. So the agency name will be listed there, then the agency type as well. And I'm actually going to go on to another slide here to explain these a little bit further. But basically, an agency type, it's single, multi, and intermediary are the 3 options. The majority of the agencies will be single agencies. Those of you who have multi and intermediary agencies, you will have an additional 10-minute webinar at the end of this session. The funding category is just more for our purposes, but also for you to understand if you're reviewing youth programs or early childhood. So we have youth, non-mentoring or youth mentoring, and then we have early childhood. In the bottom section, this is where you're going to see the program name. So this program, so XYZ is the agency name, and program that they're applying for funds is Empower. And you'll see that they are requesting $33,000 in personnel costs, $824 in travel, for a total of $33,896.40. So this is for the one program. So XYZ agency applied for more than one program. So this is the next program. If you notice, it's program 2. It's listed as program 2. And again, it's still XYZ agency in the agency name, but the program name has now changed. It is Step Ahead. And for the Step Ahead program, they are requesting funds just for personnel only, and their total is $90,000. And actually, this particular agency is requesting funds for 3 programs, but I just wanted to give you 2 to see that you have a cover sheet for for each program. I'm sorry. So each program has its own cover sheet. Some things to keep in mind with the cover sheet. First, the agency is the organization who applied for TGYS funds, so that's the umbrella agency. The type, again, could be single, multi, or intermediary. And a reminder for those of you with multi and intermediary, I hate to tell you, but you do have an extra 10-minute webinar after this. The funding category, 3 types again. There's 2 different youth categories, either mentoring or non-mentoring, and then there's early childhood. The program name is the name of one program for which funds are being applied. It's important to remember that an agency may apply for multiple programs, and each program will have its own cover sheet. And then the last thing again was the budget, which lists each section of the budget and the total for that particular program. All right, next is the program scoring rubric. So again, if you have that printed out, it'd be good to take a look at that right now to, as we're reviewing that program scoring rubric. And we will be going through each section in depth. So first, comparing the proposal. It's really important to compare the program proposal to the rubric and not to other programs. So as you're looking at various programs to review, please do not compare one to the other. Really take a look and only compare it to the rubric to see if all elements are met. Second is acronyms. All program and agency acronyms, so the acronyms that are used by that particular agency are listed in the SOW, which is the Statement of Work, and that can be found in Section 2 of the Statement of Work, where the definitions are listed. Be sure to refer back to that Statement of Work for that program for definitions when reviewing the narrative. Number 3, local context. Every proposal speaks to a local context. For example, what resources are available, the amount of staffing that is available, the size of the student or youth population, the assets in their area or lack thereof. So remember that those organizations that may be located on the Western Slope or the Eastern Plains may be different and have different resources and different needs than those that are located in Metro Denver or Colorado Springs, for example. Number 4 is similar to that, the needs of one program or application. Remember that they may be totally different than the needs of another, so we're not comparing an organization or program with another organization or program. And number 5, remember to focus on the review. You should be the focus should be on the application content and alignment to program intent. Points should not be deducted for formatting, typos, grammatical errors, or writing style. So even if there's poor grammar, that is not a reason to deduct points. Number 6, the narrative length. Narratives can be a maximum of 8 pages. Citations and references do not count in the 8-page maximum. Number 7, how to get full points. In order to get full points for a line item in the rubric, agencies must provide all information to sufficiently complete that particular line item. If they only provide partial information, they should only receive partial points. Number 8, qualification for funding. Applicants must score a minimum of 70 points out of the 100 possible points to be qualified for funding. This is not a guarantee of funding, just a qualification. Okay, Section A, here we go. Section A is on the Statement of Need and Identified Population. So the way we have set up this webinar is we've created a slide that shows the actual rubric, and then following that we will talk about things you need to remember and provide examples for the line items. So for Statement of Need, you'll notice there are 4 line items. Each one you will review on its own. And again, if it has all of the elements listed, then it would receive the 4 points for met all criteria and number 1, and so on. The total for this section is 10 points. So some things to remember in Section A. For number 1, this one's pretty self-explanatory, and so we don't have an example for it, but the key thing to remember is that any data older than 2010 should not be considered. For number 2, this is where they need to identify the gaps in resources and describe the program for which TGYS funding is requested and which population they're serving, so the identified population, and they also need to be able to show that it's not a duplication of services. So we've provided an example here that meets all the criteria and in which we would score a 2, which is the total points for this particular line item is received. So they identify their population and explain why they are requesting the funding and that there is a gap in service. So this meets all criteria. All right, moving on to number 3. Number 3 is explain the recruitment strategy and retention goals specific to the identified population. Include the current and or previous participant retention rates if available. So if this is a new program, they may not have retention rates available. So that is optional if it's a new program. So here's an example where they've met all criteria. The agency recruits youth from low-income, single-parent families through partnerships with schools, county human service departments, and other government agencies and community organizations. So they're explaining how they recruit. They go on to say that the agency's 2015 12-month retention rate was 71.5%, well above the national average of 57%. So they give you statistics about their previous retention rate and how it compares on a national scale. So this would receive the full points of 2. If they're missing any information, again, it would be a 1, and if they don't address it, the score would be 0. For number 4, so they've identified the population, both the age, the types of youth that they're serving, and the area in which the youth are coming from. They are also providing information about the agency's success with this particular population. It would be nice to have some statistics here, but it's not required. That is usually provided in other areas, so this would still meet the total points for 2 of met all criteria for number 4. All right, moving on to Section B, Program Descriptions. This is worth 35 points, so as you can tell, this is weighted heavier, and the reason for that is based on board decisions. So our board made decisions about where the priorities were for the narrative, and as you can tell in this section, Section B, they have weighted number 5 with 15 points. So this is number 5 is pretty important. So we would ask that you take a little extra time when scoring that particular line item. All right, so number 1. Things to remember. Goals, this is where you're going to be looking at goals, and goals can also be found in the SOW, the statement of work for each program. So remember that you have each program has its own statement of work, and you can refer to that in your document. So it would be important to pull out the SOW as well as the narrative when you're reviewing this section. So be sure that each of the bullet points is addressed to get full points on number 1. This one's pretty self-explanatory again, so we did not provide an example. Number 2, explain the planning process for the program for which TGYS funding is requested. So here they've identified how they came about this idea, that they've worked with the parents and teachers as well as the youth to develop this program, and then they go on to say that their funding partners include City of Denver, National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and several private foundations. So they're also working with their community and other organizations to provide funding sources. So they would receive a score of 3. For number 3, it says to describe family and or youth involvement in the project's planning and or implementation. Encourage family involvement in the planning, and the youth will be helping make decisions about actual program. So they've talked about both the family and the youth and how they would be involved in the program planning. So they would receive a score of 3. For number 4, in this particular item, there are 2 options to answer. So it's really important that you are paying attention to which funding category your program has applied for. So again, if you remember back on the agency cover sheet, it lists the funding category, and it's important to see if this is a youth funded category or early childhood. They will only answer for one funding category. So 4A would be answering for youth, and 4B is early childhood. In addition to determining the funding category, you will also need to refer to page 7 of the RFA for additional information about positive youth development, that's for the youth category, or strengthening families approach, that's for the early childhood category, if you are unfamiliar with those approaches. So we have an example that would meet all criteria for both the PYD and the early childhood. So the first example we provide here is for PYD. And rather than read through this entire paragraph, I just want to point out that this was very well written in that it actually gives the number for each of the PYD principles that they are addressing. So they list all 5, and they address all 5 principles of PYD, which is really important. So in this particular example, they would receive a score of 7. If they had only addressed 3 of the 5 principles for PYD, they would receive a score of 3. If they don't address any, they would get a 0. So again, even if they address 4 of the 5 principles, that is still not full points, and they would get a 3 for this particular line item. This next slide is a strengthening families approach response. And again, this organization did a nice job in answering this question because they made the print bold to show each of the protective factors for strengthening families approach. So they addressed all 5 of those protective factors, and it made it easy to read. So because they addressed all 5, they would receive a score of 7. Again, if they only addressed 4 or fewer, they would receive a score of 3. The other thing I want to point out in this example, this is a great example where we can talk about the acronyms. If you notice, this example has multiple acronyms just in this one paragraph. All of those acronyms are found in the statement of work. I'm trying to remember the section 2. So as you remember, we talked about that if you need to find the acronyms, you can go back to the statement of work, section 2, and see the acronyms for this particular program for this agency. All right, number 5, this is the big one. This is regarding the statement of work. So again, each program should have its own statement of work. So you'll want to have that out when you're reviewing this line item. This one is worth 15 points. And each of the components have to be completed by the agency in the statement of work. They need to make sure that they have the identified population chart. The goals must be listed and complete, and they must have SMART objectives. So we wanted to point out some examples of goals because as we were looking through SOWs, we noticed a couple of things. At times, goals are actually missing. So if the goals are missing, then that is definitely an issue. They have to have a goal in order to have a good statement of work. So an example of some things that are not goals: hiring a program manager or completing TGYS reports on time. Those should not be listed as goals. Some better examples of goals are to improve school performance by providing quality academic tutoring to middle school students, or to provide quality early care and education activities for children ages 0 to 7 to improve progress toward developmental milestones and increase positive parenting skills for participating parents. So we provided a youth goal as well as an early childhood goal here. Make sure that the goals are clear, concise, and relevant. On this slide, we have provided an example of a goal as well as the table that provides all of the information on the SOW. So in the following table, you'll see that the goal meets all the criteria and that is listed, it's listed above the table, and each column is complete. If any information is missing or if specifics are not provided, the agency would receive a score of 7. Outputs and outcomes should have specific numbers or percentages in most cases, not all, but most. Section C is worth 10 points, and this is for level of evidence-based programming. And this one may feel confusing, and we're going to try to make it as simple as possible, but it may feel a little confusing at first. So there are only 2 items for Section C, and as you can tell, Part 2 is weighted much heavier with 8 points. So let's start with number 1. This is identifying the program's level on the continuum of evidence-based. So each program has to be identified as either experimentally proven, experimental, research-informed, or opinion-informed. And you can find these more definitions and these terms in the glossary of terms in the RFA. So again, refer back to the RFA if you need to get more information about these terms. Essentially, experimentally proven is the highest level of evidence-based, and a program can be considered evidence-based when it is experimentally proven. Other programs may be in some stage of evidence-based, but they're not there yet. So the next highest level would be experimental. And then below that is research-informed. So there's research out there that has informed us that this program might possibly work, but it's still not at the level of proven. or experimental. And then the lowest level is opinion informed. And opinion informed is something like an organization who just from their observation and work in the community, maybe it's a smaller community, that they have seen success with this program. So that's opinion informed. It's not necessarily research informed unless they've tracked the data and can show some outcomes that it has actually made a difference, but it's more opinion informed. And that is also acceptable. So all of these levels of evidence-based are acceptable. A program does not have to be evidence-based to and experimentally proven to be able to receive funds. Okay, some things to note in this section. First of all, that the terms that we are using with evidence-based come from an organization called Blueprints here in Colorado. We've listed the link to the website if you'd like to learn more about Blueprints or look up information about evidence-based there. When referring to citations to provide support for level of evidence, websites like Wikipedia, About.com, an agency's own websites, those are not acceptable citations for proving the level of evidence base. If they are experimentally proven, they would have to have an organization like Blueprints or NREP or some of the others listed below that to be able to cite that they are evidence-based. So for number 1 in this section, many programs are not at that level. If they are, they have to have the citation. For number 1 and number 2A, those organizations that are evidence-based and that are experimentally proven, they can use a registry and may cite a registry such as NREP, which is part of SAMHSA, OJJDP's registry, What Works Clearinghouse, etc. Those are all reputable registries and acceptable for citations to provide a level of evidence base. For number 1 and 2B, organizations may cite other programs or data to support their programs, and this is acceptable. They're just going to be answering either Part A or Part B. So if in number 1 they've stated that the program is experimentally proven, they're going to answer 2A. 2A asks them to provide the following. Based on evidence and literature, describe how the program is appropriate for the identified population to be served. Again, they need to cite references. They need to provide a summary of evaluation results over the life of the program and describe the significant findings. So if they are experimentally proven, they will have significant findings and they need to reference that in 2A. They will also describe the procedures for ensuring that the program will be implemented with fidelity. This is really important. For those who are not experimentally proven, they are going to answer 2B. They need to state whether they're experimental, research-informed, or opinion-informed, and they need to provide information for each bullet point, again, to receive full points. So they'll need to describe why the programming was developed and how it's structured, and list any supporting evidence that they have available. If it's based on another model, again, they can reference that model and provide that website. So here are a couple of examples that we have for 2A and 2B that meet all the criteria. So for 2A, again, this is an organization that is using a program that is evidence-based and experimentally proven. So they are explaining how the staff will be trained and that they will be able to provide adherence to the fidelity because they are doing this national level training. They also talk about the increase in protective factors. So they give evaluation results, and if they are evidence-based, in this particular example, I would say it would be nice to have a little more detail on the summary of evaluation results, but we can also, and I wasn't able to provide it here in this example, but they do reference it in another part of their narrative where we can get those stats. So as long as we're able to do that and they have a good citation, we're fine. So you'll be able to see their full narrative when reviewing this question. So for number 2B, here's an example that met all criteria. Okay, moving on. Section D, goals, outcomes, and evaluation. So with this section, again, this is worth a lot of points. This is 35 points, and again, our board has decided that number 1, line item number 1, and line item number 3 are worth a higher amount of points. So pay particular attention to those sections. So number 1 is state the anticipated outcomes for each program for which TGYS funding is requested. So for number 1, you want to be sure to use the program statement of work, and you can also use the logic model here as a supplement to assist in evaluating this line item. Outcomes may be listed in both the narrative, I shouldn't say both, it's all 3, in the narrative, SOW, and or logic model. So you may find outcomes in all of those areas, so have each of those in front of you when you're evaluating line item number 1. So in this one, we wanted to provide a way, since it just says state the anticipated outcomes, we wanted to provide a partially met criteria example to give you an idea of when they may be partially met but did not fully meet the criteria. So although they tell us what they want those outcomes to be, they don't really give us specific numbers and how and what kind of improvement they're going to make. So you'll notice a difference if you look at met all criteria and we look at this answer. It's much more specific. It gives us numbers and what they expect the increase or decrease to be. For number 2, this one is asking the programs to submit a logic model for each program. So you'll need to have that logic model out as you're evaluating each program. The logic model must have the following headers in order to get full points. So these were provided to the applicants in the RFA, and they have to have each of these headers. We've noticed that some of them changed the headers and put their own headers. That is not acceptable, and that would only receive partial points. So below here is an example of a logic model that would receive full points. If you notice here, the goals must reflect the TGYS goals and must be in alignment with the organization's program goals. Each section of the logic model should build on the previous section and have consistency. To refer back to the TGYS logic model so you can see the overall goals for TGYS, you can find those on page 41 of the RFA. Number 3 in section D, again, this is a 2-part question, and it's either for existing programs or for new programs. So they're only going to answer either part A or part B for number 3. And this is worth 15 points, so this is worth a lot. So again, please make sure you pay particular attention to number 3. This is where they're describing the evaluation procedure or methods currently used for collecting their data. They need to be really specific here and provide the number of classes held, number of youth served, etc. And they need to make sure that they provide the outcome data. So what are they expecting to see? What are the outcomes that they expect to see? And this is for each program again. So for this, you will also use the statement of work as a supplemental to assist you in evaluating this line item. So you'll have the narrative, and they should talk about this in the narrative, and then they also will provide information in the statement of work. So an example for number 3A, where they've met all criteria. And this is using both the narrative and the SOW. So the first part is from their narrative, and the second part is from their SOW. Here's an example of partially met criteria for number 3A. So they talk about using a variety of tools, but they don't specifically state what they use. If you look down in the measurement part of this table, they say pre and post test, but they're really vague here, and they don't provide a lot of specifics in how they measure or how they collect data. They do say that staff go to an annual training and that the youth meet weekly, but they don't say for how long. So they give very few specifics. In their table, they say that youth will participate in intensive leadership training, but not how often or how long. They say that 100% of youth will demonstrate increased leadership skills and resiliency, but that's only through although they do pre and post test, there's no other measurement except observation. And then they say that youth will seek outside leadership opportunities, but they don't tell you how many or what those opportunities might be or how they can measure that. So here they've made an attempt to answer this. This will be partially met, but they're not very specific. So they would only receive a score of 7. If they don't do this section at all, then they would receive a 0. For part 4 of section D, they're asked to describe the staff capacity to implement a pre and post-test evaluation with program participants and identify who will be implementing that. So again, they just need to be specific with how are their staff going to be able to do this and who will be doing the implementation. All right, section E, are you all still with us? We're getting close to the end, so hang in. So section E is agency capacity. This is worth 10 points. Some things to remember, again, to make sure each item is addressed and answers provide specifics. Just through our skimming of the applications, we've noticed that section E kind of tends to drop off. Sometimes it's forgotten, sometimes it's not answered completely. So just be sure that this section is completely answered. For number 1, they're just describing the agency's prior history of delivering related services. It's worth 3 points. Again, just look for specifics. If they aren't specific, then they would only receive 1 point. Number 2, answers must, let me read the number 2 first. Define how the agency strives for inclusivity in programming and with staff, board, and volunteers. So answers must address how the agency is inclusive for not only the children, youth, and families served, but also their staff, board, and our volunteers. Now remember, they may not have a board, they may not have volunteers, they may only have staff, that's fine, but we want to make sure that they're addressing both those who are served and those who are doing the work. For number 3, they are to list the agency's policies and procedures for addressing secondary trauma and promoting self-care. So again, it's important that it's specific, and we want to talk about if they can provide frequency or training information, that will help as well, and would give them a full 3. We're finished with section E and the rubric. Last thing, if you're still awake, we're going to talk about feedback and comments really quickly, and then you'll be finished with this webinar. In this slide, we're talking about what we want you to have listed for your feedback comments. And we want you to be able to use the yellow section at the bottom of each rubric section for your comments. And you will be bringing these to the team review day to make sure that you have you can refer back to what your comments and concerns were. So please be sure to fill out the comment section in each of the sections of the rubric. Please note that all feedback and comments need to be as specific as possible because that will help during the team review. All right, here you go. Examples of strong and relevant comments that provide more specifics. So in section B, you might say that there were missing goals in the SOW and that they did not address all 5 principles of PYD. To be even more specific, you might say which principle it was or principles that they did not address. Section C, As an example would be if the agency used their own website as a reference for their level of evidence base and did not provide any evaluation results or significant findings for the program. So they're lacking some very specific things in order to get the full points there. And this is much more helpful than just say that there was missing information. Section D, the agency did not clearly explain evaluation procedure and provided no expected outcome data for the program. Again, they're being specific in your comments addressing why they would not have received the full points. All right, there we go. Now we have positive feedback, much better. Let's end on a positive note here. So some examples that do not have enough specificity would be good work, well written, provided complete answers. Again, it's nice to say those things, but the applicants really would prefer to see more specific information, and they will not be seeing these comments, but later on during the team review, you'll be writing specific comments that applicants will see. So the more specific you can be here, the better. Some good examples would be Section A, clearly defined identified population and lack of resources in the community and the need for their program to address the needs of the identified population. Section B, agency explains how they grow all 5 protective factors of the Strengthening Families approach in their programming. Section C, adequately describes how evidence-based program will maintain fidelity. So adequately may not be the best word here. It might be more than adequately describes, or adequately describes and provides information about training for staff to be able to maintain fidelity. Again, be as specific as possible, but don't spend all your time writing comments. This is just more for you to refer back when you're in your teams. And congratulations for those of you who are doing single agency training only. You are finished. We are glad you made it through, and we look forward to seeing all of you at the team review. For those of you who are doing multi and intermediary agency programs, you're going to push pause. You're actually going to be finished with this particular webinar, and we'll start up a new one.